What's up, gang?
Gang.
Oh, freak you guys.
For the gang.
Oh, wait. You better not sit here.
What?
Because I'm going to use my footstool. Yo, if you sit here, you got that footstool.
I'm gonna sit right over here.
Good side.
Hi, Griffin. Love you.
Okay, so just real quick, I'll go over what we have left. Most of you have already started on your cross-cultural investigation paper. So we have that coming up.
Tressa, if you were to start a band, what would you name it?
If I started a band,
Yeah. What would you name the band?
I have no idea. I feel like
gut reaction.
band names have to be like something you identify with,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
Like something that means something to you. So that would be really hard to choose because I like a variety of things. So it'd have to be something you would identify with musically, right?
I mean, sure, but there's also bands called like King Gizzard of Lizard Wizard, or King Lizard of something like that. Or
Fair.
No, King Gizzard of Lizard Wizard. That's what it
Yeah, that's a good question. Where and how and why did they come up with such a name like that? Somebody
Drugs.
must be a fan of either drugs or lizards.
is. I can tell you from the music it's drugs.
Yeah.
We love some psychedelic rock. Emily's band would be the Housekeepers.
Let's go.
I don't really name.
Wow.
The headbands. Yeah. That's actually kind of a decent name.
That's a
Yeah,
little
it's
offensive,
decent,
actually.
yeah.
I'm a little offended, but it's fine.
Okay, fine. It's,
Emily's offended, Ryan.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah,
That's a
because I
normal
identify
reaction
as
to
a
sentence,
as a
should I say.
housekeeper. Wow.
Fine.
Wow. Out of
There's
everything
female
else that I do,
housekeepers.
my job. Wow.
You could be like the sore shoulders.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay.
What would you identify yourself with?
Oh, I mean, like realistically, it should be skateboarding related, but like not cringe at the same time.
Okay.
I don't know. I definitely have had band name ideas in the past. I'm gonna go with we're gonna go with the Flannels. I feel like
Yeah.
it's probably a band name, to be honest. Though.
Yeah. I don't think that there's anybody with a band name like that, so.
Oh, I bet you.
But I mean, I'm not a band type of person.
Was the band okay? No, yeah, we're good. The only band the name Flannels on Spotify have like 10 listeners, so we're not real band.
Yeah.
How did that all transpire?
Yeah, what would your
T.
name?
Josh-
What would your
T.
band
Josh
name
just-
be, Griffin? I'm just warming up discussion, you know. I'm getting
Yeah,
us
this
ready.
this is good. Warm up discussion.
Yeah.
I was saying it seemed like it was like the friend group. They kind of.
Well, so he emailed me, Joe, Sarah, and Eli. But Joe didn't. And so it was going to be me, Eli, and Sarah. And Sarah didn't belongs without me. So, no, he didn't. I don't think he's purposely just targeted us. But
Who emailed you guys?
see, Josh.
Good old Gene Dash.
He's stressful.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh yeah. No matter how much public speaking I do, I feel like I still get like equally as nervous doing it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's not like for me. It's not going into it. It's after. Like then I get shaky, and then I get like,
Oh really?
Yeah.
I
it's
always
weird.
feel like I get super nervous like leading up to it, but then like the second I get up there, usually I'm there.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Dude, when I was leaving for school in October, without any prior warning, my pastor called me up on stage, and like my church has probably like, I don't know, like 200 people at service or something like that, and like I don't know that many people, but I just so happened to like wake up late, not shower. I was wearing a beanie, and I somewhat kind of like legalistic at church times, so I'm wearing a beanie, which I've gotten like I've had someone say something to me when I worn a baseball cap in church, and
Beanie is so much worse.
yeah, way worse. And like calls me up at the end of service with no warning to go and like pray for me on stage.
Oh yeah.
And so, but he like says my name, and I'm like, wait, me? So then he comes up, then he like does another announcement while I'm standing there, just waiting. So then like 3 minutes goes by that I'm actually just like standing up there. Then he actually prays for me. And then he goes, okay, and then Ryan's also going to be by the front door if you guys want to say goodbye to him or whatever. All right, Ryan, how about you head out there before we close up? I'm just like, dude, you didn't give me any warning at all.
It's fun.
What the frick, dude?
Well, Grace, we hammered it out.
Yay!
Hey, Grace, what would your band name be?
That's actually a good question because I'm starting one.
Yeah.
I don't know yet.
Are you actually Irish or no?
A large percentage.
So you could get away with Murphy's.
Yeah, actually, my last name is Murphy.
That's my
Okay, I didn't know. I didn't know you knew my last name. So. Okay, it's a common Irish last name.
Yeah. I'm from Massachusetts. We got a lot of Irish people. My mom's Irish, technically.
Nice.
Brian.
Yeah, my great grandfather came here from Ireland. No, my great great grandfather.
Good old potato guy.
Yeah. Yes. He came here with his daughter, who was a nun. So I don't really know what happened. 'Cause I
Wow.
But yeah, he probably had other kids. Actually. Kind of considered, you know, if I wasn't pursuing a band, maybe I would.
Okay. Way two different extremes there.
You said you'd be a nun? If you want-
Actually, that'd be kind of epic if I could get a bunch of nuns together and we could start a band. But
That would be
Dude,
epic.
That would be so funny. I would come to your concert.
yes.
That would be great.
Would the band be like None Your Business?
Yeah, I like that. Although we could do even better than that.
Okay. With that, we're gonna start. We're gonna do a couple things today. We're gonna talk about chapter 12 first, and then we're gonna go through some of the questions on the test for those of you. Does anybody right now in this class not have the latest edition to this book?
I don't know
I don't
what
know
edition I
either.
have.
Griffin, is it orange?
No.
Orange.
Orange.
Mine is I think it's the 2016, 2012.
The what?
2012.
I got the blue one.
2012. Okay, so this was created copyright. Wait, does it say what your edition is? This is the 3rd edition. (2012) I would say would be the 2nd edition.
The 2nd edition I have is a blue cover, and it's 2016
First
and
edition.
2012.
This is the first edition.
The 1st edition.
I think
Okay.
This is the first edition. Yes.
Yes. So, crazy that the 2nd test has a lot more updated content than the 1st test. Meaning that, and I mean, for some reason, they've just done a lot more studies in older adults in recent years than they did in the previous years. So there's just more content when it comes to an older population, which does make sense because the older population, where it used to have been people would die at age 60, are now dying at, in their 80s and 90s. So it makes sense. But we'll go over some of those questions that Grace helped me find. She was enduring through the test on Sunday. So we have quite a few things that need to be updated for that. So with that though, let's start with chapter 12. We're going to go over some of the things just to keep in mind for the test within chapter 12. And so this will be important just to give you that updated information there. Let me get to that. Okay. Great. Okay, so physical development. Now, this is the age group where we start to talk about age range of 45 to 85. There's a couple different stages within this dynamic in which they call late adulthood. And what is predominant in developed countries right now, and where our society is trying to kind of change what it's perceiving as, is that when people are in their late adulthood, in their 60s and 70s, they're saying, okay, well, they're too old. They can't learn any new information. They're going to start forgetting things. They can't process well enough. And so this prejudice is called ageism, important for the test. And so we are, as a culture, trying to change this dynamic because we've seen in recent studies, recent meaning third edition studies, we've seen in recent studies that there is a large population in this category that is capable of learning, is capable of adapting, does not have any memory issues, and really they do accelerate, a large quantity of them accelerate when it comes to conflict and areas of conflict. Why? Because they've gone through it. They've gone through life. They know how to handle conflict maybe a lot better than people who are just entering the workforce. So there's positives and negatives to where what we've seen previously before, we're now saying, okay, well, no, this needs to happen. We need to still employ people who are in this age group because of their wisdom and their expertise. They're also foundational. They were the ones that were potentially helping to start different companies at particular times. So when you have that foundation, it helps you to problem solve better. They have capabilities of problem solving a lot better. There's even an idea of, well, maybe we should decrease the amount of work hours for middle adulthood in those years of child rearing, and allow people who are in the older age group to maybe work longer hours because they're empty nesters. They don't have children. That's an interesting idea, but our society has gotten under this impression that no, in this time frame, in the 60s and 70s, people are working part-time. They're not working full-time. They are wanting to retire. They're wanting to experience adventure of where they now have put away a nest egg, so to speak, of money in order to be able to make that happen. It used to be that this age group was the poorest of all societies. Now they are increasing in their wealth. Why? Does anybody know why they are actually a more wealthier population than what they were before?
Is it like a retirement plan? They're now a retirement plan?
Yeah, and what do those retirement plans look like? Is it like a savings account, or what is it? Do you guys know what a retirement plan is?
Like a 401k?
What?
Like a 401k?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Isn't it like if you have a 401k, like a certain portion of your paycheck automatically gets put towards it and essentially saves it up for you for later?
Yeah. It's also not taxable. So part of your income is going directly before taxes are taken out to your 401k. A lot of companies will match it. So they'll actually give towards that 401k. And if you can find a company that can match it between 3 to 5%, that's really good. If you can get a company to match it higher than that, that's really good. And so it's profitable for you, even though at this stage in your age, to start looking at a 401k and putting a portion of your income into that. And my suggestion would be a 3% to start off with at this age where you guys are at now. Another portion that as you get older and you get into like your 30s, 40s, and 50s is where you're going to start putting in some of your 401k or some extra amounts that you have. Not that any of us have an extra amount, but any extra amount that you may have, you would put it into another type of a retirement account to where there's a stock. And so you could rate your stock either as a low risk or a high risk, knowing and understanding that a high risk could mean that you get a lot more for the amount that you have. A low risk would be just very sustainable. Like it's increasing a little bit as you go, but not very much. A lot of people in your age group would do a low risk at this point, increase it to maybe a medium risk, and then a high risk as they get older in age, as you guys get older in age. So with that, plus, how expensive is health insurance? Too expensive, right? This takes a majority of our income. Think about the highest things that you guys would pay for after you graduate from college. What would those things be?
Car.
What?
A car.
Car?
Rent.
Rent or house? A loan, a school loan?
Yeah. For most people,
Yeah.
there's a lot of debt.
Yeah, lots of debt. And health insurance.
But marketplace.
But
Check it
marketplace,
out.
yes. But marketplace. And if you can get into that in where you're at economically, depending on how much you're getting paid for, or even if your company allows for health insurance to be paid for by them, those are some good things. Those are, benefits. But still, even though there's that element, it takes away from your paycheck. You don't get that back, right? So when you are 65, what happens?
You usually think about like retirement.
Yeah, so you're looking at retirement and you have the opportunity to qualify for Medicare and Social Security if you want it at that point in time. A lot of people love to still work and they want to work until they're in their 70s. But, and if you start working past the 65-year time frame, then you'll get more in Social Security the longer that you work. But for Medicare, you can qualify for that. You don't have to retire, and you can still qualify for that. And it's very small amount that you pay, like minimal amounts that you pay, and you get a ton of benefits for it. My mother did something that she thought was smart, and it ended up not being wise. And that was, and she knows this already, so I tell her it all the time. She waited and saved all of her health problems until she got to Medicare. Now she has to have hand surgery. She already had a hip surgery. She had a back surgery. She just had a complete shoulder replacement on one of her shoulders. She's going to have another shoulder replacement. She's going to have a knee replacement. What do those things do when you get to be above 65? They age you. They take away from your life because every time you have a surgery at that age, you cannot recover as quickly as you could when you were younger. So my suggestion to you, don't do it. Just pay for it when you need your surgery. God will provide.
And I think like on the marketplace plan that I have right now, I only would have to pay up to a little bit over $1,000 or something for like an emergency situation.
Yes.
So even in an emergency situation, $1,000 is not that much.
Right. And if you're somebody that doesn't have health issues, and majority of your age group does not, then that's a great place to start.
You
Marketplace.
hardly pay anything.
Yeah, yeah. However, there, depending on who you're working for, marketplace does increase
Mhm.
in the amount.
Yeah, it does. It is dependent on how much you earn.
Yeah. It's a great time to adult, you know. So these are the sub-stages of adulthood. So young old is 60 to 74. Old is ages 74 to 84, and oldest old is ages 85 and up. They all have different transitions when it comes to physical and cognitive and social functioning. But this is what's considered late adulthood. So, and you can always see, even in their appearance, the different types of increasing age it even has in your face, in your skin, in all of those elements physically. So when we're talking about late adulthood and what you're able to achieve every day, your everyday living, what does that look like? How, and do we understand if chronicle age has an impact on whether you're able to function well past even the ages of 75 and up? So do any of you guys know who ages well across the world? What cultural group ages well?
The stereotype would be Asians.
Yes, the stereotype would be Asians, although it's factual. It's not really a stereotype anymore. It's factual. People who live in the southern European areas, like Greece and Italy, they age really well. So there's a lot of just these subgroups, and what has been done and researched is that there will be dietitians who go to these different countries and start studying the culture. What is it in their food that makes them and enable them to be able to age not only well with less health issues, but able to extend their life. And so there have been quite a few dietitians who've come back, and they have all these recipes and they have all these dietary plans that could really impact people who are in their late adulthood. That may happen, but studies are still inconclusive with this. Why? Because those groups have done it since they were little. They've eaten those foods. You can't just all of a sudden change your foods when you get into 50 and expect that you're not going to be able to live until you're 100. So that's where the limits are. But there is this old age dependency ratio. And what this is our fertility rate is what right now? Does anybody remember what the fertility rate is across the world? The average.
2.4.
Yeah, 2.4. Now, it's different in different countries. So this is an averaged out. So in Japan, it's at a 1.1. And in a lot of Asian cultures, it is below the 2-point threshold. Okay, so what does this do when it comes to old age? If we have extended the age group, if we've increased the numbers in the age group as far as how old they are, and our fertility rate right now is at either 1.1 or 2.4, what does that do? So think about your grandparents. The fertility rate when your grandparents were at the age to have children was more, right? It was like 4 point something, right? So that means that your parents had a 4.4 amount of children, right? So there's more. There's going to be more people who are older and less people who are younger. So we've got this ratio problem going on. How is that going to impact Medicare, Social Security?
Isn't that already an issue where, like, Social Security, there's too many people now than what they were expecting?
So there's a fear there right now. It's less here in the United States because actually our fertility rate is just a little bit higher than the 2.4. But across the world, globally, yes, it's a major concern. Developing countries do have a welfare element to them, but like in Japan, they already have something that's established for welfare, for Medicare, for their older population to be taken care of. They're going to see a huge crisis into 2050 because of this discrepancy. Unless they change, unless they start encouraging parents to have more kids, then the workforce will increase. But there's going to come a time where that's going to be more old people and less young people. Yeah.
Because what will happen is that there'll be all these elderly people, and they won't have enough, medical professionals to care for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then that goes into, well, what are we going to do with all these old people? Let's just euthanize them.
Yeah.
Which has kind of already become an issue.
In those countries. Yeah. So, and we're going to talk about euthanasia here soon. Yeah, Ryan.
Isn't it kind of already built into Asian culture though to like care for your parents, and like wasn't one of the things that we talked about either in class or in the book about like how they say like one of the when you become an adult thing is when you can provide for your parents.
Yeah, it is. But like let's just say that you had one kid. That kid died before you turned 80, or however old you were. That's going to be a problem. Now you have no kids to take care of you. What?
Or they go to a different country too. That's very popular.
Yeah, they migrate to a different country. So it's just really interesting that no one thought about this dynamic. And in some of the Asian countries, they were encouraged to have less kids because they thought the population would get too big, right? Now in China, that's getting reversed. Hopefully in Japan, it gets reversed so they don't have this crisis in 2050. They still have time to fix the problem. So hopefully they do. And encourage people to multiply the earth. So the life expectancy at age 65. Here you can see the dark blue areas are older than 65. 65? Yes. 85. 85. That's what I thought. Okay, so 85 here in Japan, 85 here in the Mediterranean, and then we have a different shade, a lighter blue shade, and this age group is 83 to 85. Okay, so and this would include some South American countries, Canada, United States. Why is it? Again, it's because of diet, pollution. All of these things do impact smoking. That impacts the death rate. And so this is, and then as far as, places like Russia, that is at 82 to 83. But living in Russia is just hard. So, and then there's a lot of places where there's no data, which is interesting. I would have thought in India we'd at least have some data, but we don't.
I think it's funny that France is dark considering smoking, and like in general,
Yeah.
France being really dirty.
Yeah, and surprisingly, they live older than 85. So global patterns, again, and we kind of already talked about this. That statistic is a problem that we're facing and a challenge. We will still face that challenge here in the United States. It's just not going to be as much, but there will be some. So looking at the older adults across the countries, so here in 1950, everybody was kind of around in the 10% category that could live over the age of 65. Again, we had a ton of smoking in this area. There's just a lot going on here in the 1950s. And then everything is starting to increase. It's starting to rise. So Japan is the highest right now, followed by Germany. And then China and the United States are here within that 20% category. So we do have, in 2050 is where we're going to see that statistic and wonder how this is going to impact. Now, one thing that this does not calculate, what has happened recently? COVID, right? So now all of these numbers have to change. This entire older generation book has got to be changed into a 4th edition because all of this stuff we don't know. with the onset of COVID and how it's decreased the older population by a lot already, these numbers could completely change
Maybe
across the
it's,
entire world.
Might have solved the Asian problem.
It may have, although because China and Japan were so strict, I kind of wonder how much it did target the older population. But that is a good point. Okay, so physical changes, biological changes. Physical changes. So hair continues to gray and thin out. Bones start to thin. What's the medical diagnosis for bones thinning and having a decrease in their density?
Osteoporosis.
Yes, osteoporosis. If you have a genetic heredity in osteoporosis, please pay attention to that because it is a problem. How can you decrease that? How can you prolong not having osteoporosis?
Drink milk.
I was gonna say
Okay.
that too.
Take calcium, drink milk, and a lot of people would say that even weightlifting helps. Age spots develop, and why does hair gray? What happens? Why do our hairs get gray? It's because actually our cells stop forming that color. So it's just hair that has no color to it. That's what's gray. Teeth get yellow, but teeth are always getting yellow. And the exercise and the diet, there's a lot of changes that happen. If people are not used to eating healthy, it's hard for them to start eating healthy. But usually some sort of, maybe a stroke or something that really just kind of disrupts what has happened, that'll wake them up to saying, oh, I really do need to eat healthier. Changes in vision do occur. There's a lot of you probably already have parents whose prescriptions for their glasses have already changed several times since you've been alive. Cataracts is a common one. Does anybody know what cataracts is?
It's like a buildup of keratin in your eyes, and it's like, and they just glow mirrors, and they can stop you from seeing.
Yeah, so it impairs your cornea, and you can't see as well. So you could have like half of your abilities to see could already be clouded up. This happens when you get older, but you can change that, right? You can have surgery to change that, which is awesome. My great aunt, who is in her 80s, just had cataract surgery for the first time, and she has always worn glasses. And now she's not wearing glasses for the first time, and she's in her 80s, and she loves it. Glaucoma is another thing. Macular degeneration is another thing. All of these are part of the eye's ability to see and being able to even look at and understand depth perception. So when our eyesight goes, what happens to our driving? It becomes worse, right? Speed, that our abilities to be able to see and understand that another car is coming close, or how much our speed is, deaccelerated or accelerated, it becomes a problem. Changes in hearing. Anybody have grandparents who have hearing aids right now?
My mom does.
Oh, your mom has hearing aids. Okay.
My grandparents do.
Yeah, your grandparents. Yeah, this is another thing. The problem with hearing aids is that they not only make the sounds of a person talking, but it also increase all the other sounds. So what are other sounds that are going on in this room right now other than me talking?
The roar of the computer.
Yeah, the computer, the projector, the heater. So now you have an increase in all of those sounds, plus the person who's talking. So that creates headaches for people. People don't like to see what's going on when they have their not to see, but to hear what's going on with their hearing aids, because they cannot distinguish sometimes between me talking to you or somebody else talking to somebody else in the room. It's harder. So this does affect, and so what people will do is, well, I can't hear very well. When I put my hearing aids in, I hear a ton of things, and that's hard for me to concentrate. So what am I going to do in response to that? I may just isolate myself. I may not go to places where there's a lot of people anymore. I may have to just be where I can actually hear and understand only one person. So I might just, instead of doing group activities, I might just do one-on-one things with people. Families coming over for Christmas, that might be stressful now. And so we'll talk about that in just a little bit of just the overall quality of life that happens and the changes that occur. Taste and smell are also changing as people age. Your taste buds actually stop forming at, I think it was 60, age 50 or 60, they stop forming. So you're going to decrease in the foods that you eat, and your taste, your olfactory factory is also going to make an impact. What does this mean? It's dangerous in some ways because you cannot smell maybe gasoline. You may not be able to smell smoke if the house is burning. So those things are a problem. That's why some older people do get stuck in their houses when their houses are burning, and people are trying to figure out, well, why? How did that happen? Why didn't they get woken up by the smoke? It's because they didn't actually understand the smell that they were smelling. Sleep problems, sleep apnea. Anybody's parents have a sleep apnea machine? Okay, this is a thing that will occur. Now remember, you guys will get to this age one day. And it's okay, right? But these things do occur. Your parents will start to have these things occur in their lives. What happens when your parents have these things start to occur? It impacts you. It impacts you because you will be responsible for caring for them someday, potentially. I don't know. Griffin's got like 10 siblings, so they might live at one children's home every month of the year, and they would just be, the oldest child.
I think the richest
goal is
child.
to
The
be
richest, yeah.
So you don't have to deal with your parents.
I'm going into ministry.
Quality of sleep. Okay, so this is an issue. The problem with not having good sleep is that it decreases the cognitive abilities in your mind and impacts in a way that means Alzheimer's or dementia. So your parents want to get good sleep. When they say they're not getting good sleep, find out why. Let's problem solve with them. Let's encourage them maybe to go to the doctor and figure it out. Because if they can figure it out at the ages that they are at right now, which, what do we have for age groups in this room? How old are your parents, Grace?
They're in their
50s, okay?
60s.
60s? 60s? 50s?
Both 59.
59? Okay, good. If we can figure out these issues now, then their chances of getting dementia or Alzheimer's are lessened. If they do have sleep problems or insomnia is another thing. So treating sleep issues, having them get good exercise, avoiding naps maybe, but some people need their naps during the day. And then really just figuring out, do we need to have melatonin as a part of a regime? Melatonin is great, it's all natural. And you can take some and actually get really good quality sleep. And if you need to have that help, that's not a problem because it is natural and it means that you're delaying that onset of Alzheimer's or dementia. Arthritis. Anybody have parents who have arthritis yet?
I think I have arthritis.
You think you have arthritis? There's rheumatoid arthritis. Anybody have that in their family? Genetics.
What's the difference between that and normal?
Yeah, so rheumatoid arthritis is called RA. It's an early onset of arthritis. It not only impacts the joints like regular arthritis does, but it also impacts the neurological nervous system, which means that when you get into your 80s and 90s, you can't feel things. You can't feel your legs anymore. You have a decreased mobility at that point. It impacts your sleep, it impacts your lungs. Basically, rheumatoid arthritis means that at some point you could potentially just die because your lungs stop working. Or your brain stops working, so that means your heart stops pumping. So potentially people could just die in their sleep just because of that. But predominantly arthritis impacts your joints. So this is something because not only is it like your knees and your elbows and your shoulders, but it's your back. It's your hips. A lot of people have hip replacements when they get to be 60 because of arthritis, those types of things. So the common replacements for joints happen in the 50s and 60s on up because of arthritis. So osteoporosis, we talked about. Hypertension. Hypertension is blood pressure, high blood pressure. This can be genetic. It can also be just if you or your spouse or anybody in your family isn't eating right, you can get high blood pressure just from being overweight. But it can be either genetic or that disposition of being overweight. So diet helps, medications help. When it's genetic, you kind of have to resort to medications. Unfortunately, not even taking out everything that would increase your blood pressure, even taking that out may not decrease your blood pressure. Why is it important to make sure your blood pressure isn't too high?
Can it affect your heart?
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's really hard on your heart. It deals with the circulation, in throughout your entire body. So that's a problem.
Doesn't it also affect your anxiety levels?
Yeah. A lot of people who have high amounts of anxiety will have a high blood pressure.
What causes what? Is it the blood pressure causes the anxiety, or the anxiety causes the blood pressure?
Anxiety causing blood pressure. If you aren't eating very well, this means that if you have high blood pressure, if you had any sort of plaque buildup in your arteries from cholesterol, then you have a chance of what? Stroke or heart attack. So that's why hypertension is a problem, and over 70% of adults have it. That's a huge percentage in people who are over 65. So all of your parents are getting to that age. So you have to start asking your parents, how's your blood pressure? What does that look like? Emily's gonna go home with a list of questions for her parents.
You know what they're gonna do in real life?
Yeah. What? Why all these questions? So good impacts on diet. And this is really big. If you have diets that are low in fats and low in sugars, this helps in all areas of living. It makes it quality. But I will say this, and this sounds really depressing, and I don't really mean it to be depressing, but there are adults who have done everything right and they still have issues. All of these things will prolong the problems, but it may not take away the problems completely. We could eat as healthy as possible and we could still have cancer. We can still have RA. We can still have a ton of these things. But some things to consider, again, red meats, have a balanced diet. Don't eat beef all the time. Don't eat pork all the time. If you eat things that are rich in what's called a Mediterranean diet, which we'll talk about here, is olive oil, fish. Fish is really good to eat. Chicken is really good to eat. Those things are good. Vegetables, fruits, all of these things, and I'll show you about fruits in a second. Things that are high in antioxidants are really good. And then exercise. Again, so my parents my mom's parents took care of them before they passed away, and now my parents have been taking care of my father's parents. They have just recently been moved to a home because my grandmother has a very debilitating disease right now, and it's gone past the care that my parents can provide. If you want to be completely sold out in taking care of your parents when they age, and you want to make sure that they don't go to a nursing home, then my suggestion is go work at a nursing home or a hospice center, or become a CNA, because there will come a point where you may either have to make a choice of sending them to a home or not, depending on how much knowledge you have access to, how much you know and understand what's going on. So my grandfather, he passed away in a hospice center, but prior to that, he was living at home, and then his kidneys failed, and he died at hospice. He could have easily died at home as well, but it had gone past the care that my mom could provide for him especially. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, passed away five years after she had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She had gone past the care that my parents were able to provide for her as well. So it gets to a point where you have to make a decision like that. This is just so, I'm sorry, this is so depressing. but these are things that you have to consider. Because, it's part of adulting. It's part of our lifespan of what we're getting into. Maybe this is too personal of a question, but do any of you guys feel like your siblings would be the ones that would take care of your parents, or do any of you guys feel like maybe you would be the one that would be responsible for taking care of your parents?
My sister, who's 3 years older than me, she'll most definitely be like the one who takes care of my mom or anything.
Okay.
My dad, probably, or something like that. I don't think anybody wants my dad.
No one wants your dad?
I don't want my dad. Nor do I think he'd want to be in anyone's care anyway.
I know, but sometimes there's not a choice.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, I think any of my siblings would be willing to help. I don't know if there would be a specific one, but any of them would be willing to.
Any of them would take your parents in?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think mostly the same with my siblings, although I would imagine I have a sister who's like 5 years older than me, and I would bet that it would be her. She just has a very maternal personality, and I just think that would probably end up being her.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of depend on how debilitating the disease is and how much care they need, but probably would be me when it comes to taking care of my mom. My dad, don't really know what would happen.
Yeah.
I have a feeling he would probably demand to stay home no matter what, and unfortunately, I don't think any of the siblings would want to get for him, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, those of you who said that you're probably not going to be the one that takes care of your parents, potentially might be still taking care of parents, but they might be your spouse's parents, depending on where that lines up. Griffin? So all of this to say, if you happen to not be a caregiver of either your parents or potentially if you have a spouse parents, what is very important as a sibling is to help with the emotional health of your sibling. That's being the caregiver. Because they are going through something that's very challenging and very selfless for them to be able to do this. Also, giving them breaks. So going and taking care of your parents for a week while they are able to get some vacation time. Offering those times, giving them the availability at least twice a year, if not more, if you're able to. Really, really does relieve the pressure that they have to take care of them. But a lot of people don't know or understand that this is a part of that process. Because a lot of us, I think, we think, oh, well, you know, my brother's going to take care of them or my sister's going to take care of them. And I'll contribute just a little bit here and there. But as your parents age, the more complicated things get as well. Because you're talking about probably a doctor's visit, if not a prescription, every week that your sibling is taking them to or getting them for. Making meals, potentially having to shower or bathe them, taking care of their wounds. And then there's this part of wondering, is this going to be the last day? And you think that thought for months. Is this going to be the last day? So that's also very emotionally taxing. I can't even tell you how many times my mom has called in just tears. And it ages you as well. It will age your siblings if your siblings are the ones that are taking care of your parents. Because it's much more stressful to deal with parents than it is with children. And the reason being is because you're trying to figure out, how can I talk to you and communicate with you that doesn't sound patronizing, that sounds respectful, because they are the parents. In their minds, they're thinking, I'm still smarter than you, I'm still stronger than you. They're thinking these things, even though the reality is that they're not. But they get to the point where they regress back into becoming a child. And their frontal cortex, their executive functioning, remember, it decreases once you hit 50. So every year is a decline in that part. They will get to be where they're children again, and they'll have diapers potentially, depending on when God takes them home. Yeah.
Just to add to that, I think one thing that's true when it comes to developing dementia or Alzheimer's, you do kind of revert to your child self, but you also just kind of become, like, if you are a good person, that will come to light when you've lost your mind because you've had a good heart. But if you are somebody who is selfish and probably mentally ill and whatnot before you develop the disease, you're probably going to be a lot more difficult to deal with. So it's just something to keep in mind, like, try to live a life that, I don't know, that blesses other people, so that if you end up losing your mind, you still have a good heart. I don't know. That sounds kind of cheesy, but...
Yeah, well, yeah, and allowing God to just continually refine you and mold you. But even then, like, my grandmother is probably one of the sweetest people I've ever met. And when she, like, the last couple years that she lived with my parents, she would cuss. She never used a cuss word in our entire time, that any of us knew her. And she would cuss. And I think it had to do with, her parents weren't Christians, and her siblings, many of them weren't Christians. And so those were common words that she grew up with. And so again, she reverts back to her childhood self. And those words, for some reason, are lodged in there still. And there's no filter now, or was. Okay, so we talked about this a couple weeks ago, about when you get up to 74, 75, the increase in crashes occurs. So you have it in early adulthood, and then late adulthood is when it happens. And again, it's because of those sensory abilities that are declining. But it's hard to give up driving. And it's hard to give up that freedom, because now you don't have a way to get to the grocery store every time you want to go. Now you don't have a way to go to the doctor's office. You're having to depend on somebody else to take you to those places. That transition of being independent to dependent is really, really hard. So the reason why your parents or your grandparents, it's hard to take away the keys, is not because they're trying to be stubborn about it and hateful and spiteful. It's just because they don't want to be a burden on you, first of all. And now they have no choice but to be that burden on you and that dependent on you. And that's just hard to do that to your kids in their minds. This probably doesn't apply to the majority of us, but the damage of smoking and heavy drinking impacts in a lot of ways. It impacts in cancer a lot, heart disease a lot, blood pressure a lot. And of course, we've done a ton of campaigns in the United States to decrease the smoking, and that has helped and has prolonged people's lives because of it. And so smoking rates now, what it looks like is more than 30% are going to be in just a lot of European and Asian countries. Here we're at 10 to 19% right now. And then we still have, South American countries, Central American countries are at 20 to 30% still. And it's just good that we are decreasing. We have that campaign to do that. So a new way to think about old age is to think about successful aging. How can we become successful? How can your parents become successful with aging? And so these are the three things that we would say, and this is part of your test, that will maintain good, successful aging. Physical health, maintaining cognitive functioning, and continued engagement in life. Again, this is successful and it prolongs that aging process, but it doesn't solve the aging process because we will die one day. And so these things are helpful. I remember my grandparents playing solitaire on the computer every single day. They made it their habit. They would play solitaire and they would go walking and they would eat healthy foods. And they were very invested in those things. And it helped. It helped prolong those processes. But it's not going to solve it. So successful aging, also there's a genetic component, which is interesting too, because there are a lot of people who have done all the wrong things in their life and they still live until they're 90 or even 100. And it's because of genetics sometimes that enable that to happen. There's a couple other types of things that are occurring in the body with their cellular makeup that impact their abilities not to get cancer even. So social cultural frameworks work as well. We know in Asian countries that they are able to prolong, and a lot of it has to do with genetics and the way that they eat. And this is impactful in a lot of ways. So cognitively, memory is something that does start to decline over time. And this decline usually happens when they start to get in their mid-70s into 80s. But we still have people who are able to function just fine even past that time, genetically. But the declines happen in selective attention, divided attention, and sustained attention, which all of these things have been developed, and we've learned the development of these things in our different phases of life. Now we're seeing it decline. So all the things that we built up are now going downhill. So memory, and then just some other types of sources. There's even what's called a positive memory, where you only think about all the positive things that have happened in your life. You forget the things that were bad and that were painful. This is an okay thing to happen. But a part of that process too is if you forget the things that were hurtful or that you hurt others by, you can't understand anymore of why somebody is not talking to you anymore. So that's a problem too when you have that positive memory and that's all you're thinking about. There's no reference, there's no frame of reference to the past. That can be very frustrating to the person who's been hurt by that parent. And it'll increase their bitterness towards that person because they don't feel like that thing was resolved between the two of them, and they'll always just feel like it was unfinished business. There was no I'm sorry for what had happened, and so that's a hard thing for children to have, or siblings to have. So brain mass does decline. Our brains will start to shrink. And the spaces within the brain starts to become more wider and prominent, meaning that we're starting to lose some of that memory, some of that cognitive process. And so even the neurotransmitters will decline. And that's also a problem because then we have a tendency to not only develop Alzheimer's, but to get depressed really easily. So in late adulthood, we have an increased risk in dementia. And this increase of dementia can resolve into Alzheimer's. A lot of people will be diagnosed with just dementia first, before it gets to the point where it gets to Alzheimer's. And what happens with Alzheimer's is that there is anxiety and aggression that's kind of paired up with it. Do we know why it's paired up with it? What would cause somebody to get anxious and aggressive with Alzheimer's?
Well, they can only, I guess, be present for so long before they get confused and they don't understand what's going on. So they might, at one moment, be okay with a caregiver giving them a shower, but then the next moment they're like, what's happening? And they feel violated or whatever. I think that oftentimes increases anxiety, just not understanding what's happening.
Yeah, and sometimes caregivers don't understand the memory decline that's happening, the cognitive ability, and so they're going to reflect what you give them. So if you're frustrated as a caregiver, like, no, this is not what happened yesterday, this is what happens yesterday, don't you remember? That's going to increase their aggression and their anxiety. Because especially if they're aware that they've been diagnosed with this, they understand to some ability what's occurring and what's happening. And so every time you point it out to them, they're thinking, I'm getting worse, I'm getting worse, you know. And we all know how debilitating Alzheimer's can get, to the point where you're, you know, wearing diapers, you don't remember how to feed yourself, you don't remember how to swallow. It's an incredible decline that happens. You don't know and remember how to communicate. So you get to the point where you can only grunt like a baby. You can only cry like a baby. You cannot communicate that you're in pain, even. And so those things can occur kind of quick. People sometimes try to hide Alzheimer's and dementia. So if you have a very protective parent, who's the caregiver of the other parent, they may try to overshadow what's going on, because they don't want, A, for you to know and be concerned about it, and 2, it means that if you know and you're aware, then you could be transitioning to a different home, so like an assisted living home or somewhere where there's memory care centers available. Or it means that now you're responsible to making sure that your, you know, dad or mom or whoever the caregiver is giving sufficient care to the person. So I've had friends whose parents really did try to hide this from them, and by the time the caregiver had passed away, then it was discovered, oh my goodness, my mom or my dad has Alzheimer's. And if you can imagine that just being right now in the face, and Alzheimer's goes through stages, and those stages can last a year to 5 years, depending on what's occurring. And there's 7 stages that occur. And so this can be hard if you understand, oh, you know, my mom or my dad is now in stage 3 or stage 4. I can't believe it's gotten to this point. You don't have time to just transition. The only time you have is to actually do and be aware of what's going on. And now you have to make a lot of decisions really quickly, which can be hard. So it's best if everybody understands that your parents are going to age. They're going to get old, and you have to start looking for some signs. Even with my grandmother, when my grandfather passed away, they both had this desire to be buried in their hometown. I don't know why, but that's what they wanted to do. And it was a small little town in South Dakota. And so that's the other part, is if a spouse dies, it will actually progress the Alzheimer's or dementia. It'll enhance it. It's like a magnifying glass. And so you can imagine that amount of grief that takes its toll. And so, you know, those two were inseparable. They had been married for like 60 years. They were high school sweethearts, you know. So when my grandfather passed away, it was really, really, my grandmother knew what was going to happen, but it was really hard for her. So it took a lot of mental hardship on her. So it was 6 months. My grandfather had been cremated, and so we were taking his ashes up there. We would have a funeral service, very similar to what we had down in Arizona, with all of his siblings and cousins and everybody who was still living up there. So when I went up there, I stayed with my grandma in the room, and it was at my aunt and uncle's house, and there was a clock in there that was exactly the clock that my grandparents had when they were at their house in Arizona. And for some reason, that clock made my grandmother go back in time. And so when I woke up the next day, I woke up to her waking me up. And there was a specific amount of time in high school when my parents were on the mission field in Mexico that I would stay at my grandparents' house. So my grandma would frequently come in when I was in high school and wake me up at 6:30 to get ready for school. It was just something that she did. So for some reason that put her back in that time frame. And so when she woke me up at 6:30 in the morning, she wakes me up and she's like, "Tressa, isn't it time for you to get ready for school?" You know? And I was like, "Well, is she joking? What is going on?" You know? And no, she was completely dead serious. And I told her, I was like, "No, Grandma, it's Saturday. I don't have to go to school. You know, I just played along with it." And that is something that is really important, is to do a playing along role play type of thing as much as you can, because it means that it'll take them maybe back in time, which is okay. It's not like they're not gaining anything by doing that. What is really high anxiety and very aggressive and can create a lot of emotional conflict is when you tell them, "What are you saying? No, you know, we're here. This is where we're at," you know. And it just took her about 30 minutes to get back to the present, to where we were and what we were going to do that day. So it wasn't that big of a deal. But my mom was in denial of it. She's like, "Oh, well, that's a weird thing that happened." You know, I told my uncle about it. "Oh, well, that's odd." And then there were a couple other signs that I kept noticing, kept telling both of them, "Hey, there's this thing that happened now." "Oh, that, I don't know. Maybe it's just because she's going through grief," you know. And so they were completely disillusioned by it for several months, until finally it got to the point where there's a consistent pattern of loss of memory. And it had to get to that point. And had they realized it sooner, there's some medications that can be taken to prolong and delay that to happen. And she should have been on that, you know, maybe a year before it happened. So even though it sounds a little bit depressing, it's good to know where your parents are at and to kind of figure out, okay, where are you at in this aging process? Especially those of you who are younger siblings, where your parents are older. It's good for you guys to know. A lot of people with Alzheimer's will lose names. They won't remember who you are. Sometimes they will. They'll remember your name, but they could not remember for the life of them how to eat some food. And that happens. So you don't know exactly what's going to happen to your particular parent and how it's going to manifest itself. They have found that there is a specific gene that's related to Alzheimer's. It's called the ApoE gene. This is commonly found in African Americans for some reason, but also they have somewhat statistically found out that if you had a diet that was high in fats and sugars, this could also be a part of that Alzheimer's conflict. But if you eat well, you exercise, it can delay it, may not take care of it and resolve it right away. Also, a lot of stress. If there's high amounts of stress, which is hard too, because life is hardship. It just is. So you can't take away hardship from your parents or from yourselves. You know, it's part of the process of life. But if there is an increased amount of stress, it can increase the chances of Alzheimer's as well. and it's difficult for caregivers to cope. So if you or your siblings are taking care of your parents and they have Alzheimer's, it's good to find a support group. Just like it is for anything that's hard in life. If you can find a support group or people who've had experience with Alzheimer's, maybe they've been caregivers of their parents, it's good to understand these things. My mom was so frustrated all the time until she found a support network of people who understood what she was going through. And then it helped so much with her. Helping her mom through this process. Wisdom is linked to old age. And I think we think that wisdom is linked to old age just because they've been through so many things. They understand, they have experience, and it's true to some degree. But remember, people always didn't handle things the right way growing up either. So we can't just link wisdom to old age all the time. It's not possible. We're gonna take a break and then we'll come back and talk about optimization and compensation. So if you guys want to take 10 minutes, get back here at 10. Get back here at 2:15. Break. Wow, Griffin, you just like lucked out there.
I had a good spread over there in the
Oh.
lobby.
In the lobby?
Yeah, they're doing cookies and cocoa. They're calling it in Madison Hall.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Wow. That's a pretty intense spread over there. Okay, so a couple things to note for the test. So as far as specific diet programs for late adulthood, you'll want to know and identify that low carbohydrate, high protein plans are what is considered the healthiest form of eating. And this really can be attainable, especially for those who are up there in age, just because there's a lot of protein shakes. Ensure is something that a lot of older adults will drink every day. That's high protein. Low carbohydrate, meaning that they're not going to eat cake every day. They're not going to eat cookies every day. Those types of things. It's good to have like sugar-free items available. A lot of older people do tend to get diabetes at this age, so that's just something to be aware of when you're looking into the care of your parents. Something else that you'll want to know is that there 31% of adults who are 65 years of age and older, 31% of them have a loss of teeth. So I don't know if in your family you have bad teeth, if it's a hereditary element, but just know that when your parents get to a certain age, some of them may qualify for dentures. Something that's emerging now is to have teeth implants, but each tooth costs about $3,000 to have implanted. So it may be a case of where maybe your parents would prefer to have like maybe half of their teeth done and the other half be dentured. But a lot of people who choose to have their teeth pulled, it's a good thing, because it means that there's less likelihood of them having an abscess in their teeth. And an abscess can lead to a stroke and a heart attack. So if their dentist is recommending that their teeth be pulled, then that's something that they should consider for sure. Yeah.
I was at my dentist appointment not too long ago, and I saw something that talked about how you need to take care of the germs in your mouth, because it can actually affect your brain and can contribute to developing Alzheimer's, I think they had said.
Mhm.
I didn't know if you had anything to add to that, or if you've heard of that before. Or...
Yeah, so gum disease, ulcers in your mouth, and cancer on your tongue because there's cancer in your tongue too. Those things can impact the abilities to have short-term memory loss. It's amazing how your mouth can really impact the rest of your body in a myriad of ways.
Doesn't the Bible say like the tongue is like the most dangerous weapon or something?
Yeah, in a myriad of ways. Yeah. And then also, a lot of men have a problem with their shrinking of bladder and an enlarged prostate. So the enlarged prostate is probably the biggest thing and is also the correct answer on the test as far as men having issues. You can have prostate cancer. That's pretty fatal. If you can catch it early in its early stages, then it's not fatal. So at least they've done a lot in that area. Okay, and then the next thing is longevity dividend. And this is where older adults are still engaged in society. They still are able to contribute in a positive way in their family roles, in their work, and their community service. Which leads us to the selective optimization with compensation element. So with along these things, the longevity dividend is able to be prolonged if they're able to utilize this. It's not really an equation, but it's selective. It's the ability to delay cognitive decline by being selective in their activities, in their social engagements, in the things that they used to do, and now it's going to decrease. So, can I use your dad's situation as an example?
Sure. If you want to see the picture, let me know.
Yeah, show them picture. Okay, so in Nebraska, they had mountains of snow. How many inches?
I don't
Do you
even
know?
He didn't say. This is my church.
Oh wow.
So it's like a 6 to 7 foot drift.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so her dad dug his way into the door. How old is your dad?
It's like 63.
63 or something. So, I mean, he's still able and qualified to do that. Now, if he was in his 70s, so we're looking at like 74, he would want to use this selective optimization with compensation. So this is what it would mean in this dynamic. He would still want to get rid of the snow, but he would probably use a snowblower. So he would select a snowblower as the easier thing than actually a shovel to dig out 7 feet of snow, right? He would optimize his performance in this area in that he would only go towards the door. So he would enable the door to be open and shut, and that would be where it stood. So he wouldn't remove all of the snow along the whole side of the church. He would just remove it to the door and allow it to be quality. And then he would probably go and he would rest for the rest of the day. That's what this means. That's the equation of this. So you're choosing something and doing it at a lower degree than what you used to be able to do, and you're doing less of it. So like a pianist would probably pick out maybe some songs that were less complicated, not as fast, but still be able to perform them, and be able to give a quality performance, just not as to the standard of what he used to maybe do in mid-adulthood or younger. So this helps with the longevity dividend. So late adulthood can be a time of contentment and peace. Although, just like in every other stage of life, we have to work on this. It's not something that naturally comes. And really, a lot of times when somebody has led a very successful life, they have the provisions that they need to carry on a quality end of life, then their emotions are going to be positive. However, studies have shown that if you have had a lot of drama in your life, if you have people that are not speaking to you anymore, if you've alienated people from you, then you can get into the point of depression, which makes sense. That's the consequence of your actions, right? So I have a friend who, her husband is a rancher, and his parents are in their mid-60s, and they're going through a divorce. And he is not a very nice guy. He's been a jerk their whole life. And what's happening right now is he's $7 million in debt with his ranch. He likes to hoard cows, meaning he has too many cows to feed. And he also has a habit of buying horses. So he's got like 50 horses that are just completely, horses are expensive and they eat a lot. And there's been a drought. So like he's just continuing to rack up the bills. Well, his wife wants to have a divorce because of how horrible he's been to her. His children are siding with their mother on this. So there's two options for him. He can either sell the ranch to his sons, which they've offered, or it could be taken to the lawyers and divided up into thirds, of which he will go completely bankrupt. And he won't have any retirement to live on. So he would rather do it that way, so that way his wife won't get half. Now, what is his end of life going to look like?
Well, before that, do they live in Missouri at all?
Yeah.
Where do they live?
Yeah, they live
From
in
my
Missouri.
understanding, if you get a divorce in Missouri, you have to split things.
Yes. Yeah, you do have to split it.
So, how could he have the option to not split it?
No, if he sold it to his sons, he would still have to split it.
Okay.
The amount. He would still have to split the amount. If he chooses not, but that could be a 50-50 thing. If he chooses not to sell it to his sons and just sells out, then he would get a third, the lawyers would get a third, and his wife would get a third.
Okay, so she'd be
Yeah.
getting something still, but not.
But not like 50-50. And he would rather, because he's so mad at her, to her only getting a third and him going completely bankrupt because he's so mad at the situation. He's in his mid-60s. He still has about 20 years of life left. What is that going to look like? He's going to be completely lonely. He's alienated everybody around him from him. It's not going to look good, right? And so at some point, he's going to look back on his life and hopefully see how his bad decisions have impacted him, but he will have nothing for it. He will not have any sort of emotional connection to any of his children or what will now be his ex-wife because of his choices. So there are those things that happen, and that's, part of this process is by the end of your life, you've probably accumulated a lot of consequences, either good or bad. So Erikson's theory, although maybe not completely true, is true in some points, in that older people will experience despair. And they will experience this despair, especially if they have not lived a very good life and have not been good with their relationships with people. And then there's what's called ego integrity, which means that you're content, you're at peace with what has happened in your life. You've been fruitful with your relationships, you've been good to people. That's what ego integrity means. So obviously, older adults want to seek relationships that are low in conflict. So that way they can enjoy mutual enjoyment, and it can be completely positive. And so that's kind of where in the older adulthood, that's where you want to go to. So adults are going to pursue these goals by what they view as positive versus negative. That means they're going to be selective in their relationships. So in young adulthood and emerging adulthood, you have a variety of social networks. You have roommates. You have a group of friends. You may have 3 groups of friends. You have work. You have church. You have all of these social connections. That's a lot of energy to keep up with all of those things. When you get older, you are not going to have as many connections anymore. And right now, you're probably sitting thinking, wow, that sounds boring. And it's not, because you slow down. You slow with age. So it's not boring. It's like what you can do, what you can achieve. You do see those commercials on TV, or you look and you see and observe shows, or maybe you've observed this from where you've been, but you look and you see assisted living homes or retirement communities that are, bursting with social connections and all these hobbies that you can do and doing it with people. Yes, but those groups are limited. You may have one hobby. You may not have multiple hobbies. You may have one that you have a group of people that you're connected with and you find enjoyment with. And so it gets very selective. And you'll even notice that when your parents get to a certain age, so you've, lived till you're middle age, you may have kids, you may still be single, you are single. Whatever the case of life that you're in, you will notice that your parents will start to pick and choose what social engagements or family engagements that they want to be at. And they may say no. And that might leave you confused, like, why wouldn't you want to be with us? It could just be their energy, or if they've gone through something that has taken a lot of energy from them. They may have been sick, or they're just getting over being sick, and they just can't do it. It's too much for them. They may go to these engagements and only stay for like an hour or maybe 2, where they used to stay all night. It's just part of that process. So this is what we see, right? We see like, oh man, it's great to retire. And it is for a time. But then things start to slow down and you don't have as many networks anymore. So the relationships with children, and this also kind of correlates to where people are living. So we know that there are nursing homes out there. We know that there are assisted living homes. Do you guys know the difference between a nursing home and an assisted living home?
In assisted living home, you're still technically living by yourself, but like you can get help in certain areas. But in nursing home, like you are not living by yourself. You can like a place where nurses will come and
Yeah. Have you guys all visited a nursing home before? How would you describe a nursing home?
I think it depends on the nursing home.
Yeah, it does depend. What did you see?
A lot of really sad, depressed people, and the people that I know of that have gone there have just gotten awful care in a lot of the time. It's not a place. I don't know. I guess it depends on what nursing home, but a lot of nursing homes are just, they're low staff. People are there because a lot of the people that are working there are there because they have to be there in order to get the experience that they need to do what they actually want to do with their life. It's not their passion, and so they don't give care that they really should be giving to patients. It's a really sad environment.
Yeah.
But, I mean, certainly some of the ones I visited have been better run than others.
Yeah, there are some nursing homes, and they cost more, that do have what's called an activity planner. And they plan out activities for everybody to do, which is good because then people can pick and choose what they want to do. They have maybe some lounges where there's like a 1,000-piece puzzle going on, or a game night, or something like that, to just to increase their quality of life there. But the rates of depression are, and this is on your test, the rates of depression are especially high in older adults who are living in nursing homes. which is sad, but it's and that's why it is preferable for somebody to take care of them and maybe delay that process as much as possible. There is what's called in-home care. In-home care is extremely expensive. You could probably use it as like an assisted living thing, where you'd have somebody come in, make some meals, or do maybe some household chores, those types of things. Maybe be the nurse in some areas. But in-home care, you're talking about $25 to $30 per hour. That's, unless you're rich, that's a really hard thing to have. So it's not sustainable. When you get to a nursing home or maybe an assisted living home that transfers into a nursing home, a lot of times if you can get in, you're going to pay out all the money that you've saved up. So that's going to go really quickly, because most of them, it's about $3,000 to $5,000 a month. Usually if it's you and your spouse that are moving in, that's about $7,000 to $8,000 a month. That's, you're talking about like $100,000 a year. So your savings can go really quickly, your retirement can go really quickly, but what they do is they'll say, okay, we're going to use this up, we're going to charge you this amount, but then once you hit your, Social Security welfare plan, then we're going to continue to keep you on. So they make it super expensive right up front, but on the back end, then you're able to have what you need. But as far as children go, though, in the Western cultures, it's typically that the oldest daughter would take care of the parents. In the Asian cultures, it's that the oldest son would take care of the parents. So that's also on the test. So in different countries, usually it's the oldest son because they have already, started to provide for their parents. And then in the Western cultures, because we see as caring and nurturing more with women than with men, so typically then that's what occurs. However, depending on family dynamics, you may have a family dynamic where your sibling is addicted to drugs or something else, a health issue. Whatever the case, it may mean that, the opposite gender or the other sibling that maybe was supposed to take care of your parents can no longer take care of your parents anymore. So now it's up to you. Those dynamics can happen as well. Relationships with grandchildren and children, great-grandchildren. So your parents are going to be closer with your kids. You will be closer with your grandparents than your kids will be with your grandparents. So great-grandchildren, there's just not as much connection there. Why? Because your parents or your grandparents are older by the time there's great-grandchildren available to have. Unless, your parents had children at a very young age, then they may still have energy and build a relationship with their great-grandchildren. It really just depends on the situation and the occurrence, but predominantly, grandparents and grandchildren have the closest relationship. And grandparents are more lenient with their grandchildren than they were with their children. So there's that part too. Which I'm sure some of you guys have noticed already. With your siblings, nieces, or with your nieces and nephews. Emily's over there smiling. Is that what's happening in your house? Yeah. We kind of already talked about that. Making sure that we're here. So yes, to what you said, Grace, nursing homes, it's not, people who are in there taking care of your parents aren't blood related. They don't have as much of investment and care into your parents. So in other cultures, taking care of the elderly is actually seen as more of a privilege. It's seen as something as giving honor to those who are old. We don't have that, unfortunately, in our society. So that's really hard. Because then you are left with a lot of nursing homes that don't take care of their people in there very well, which is unfortunate. That's why if you can delay that as much as possible, it's good. That transition will never be easy to transfer your parents or your grandparents into a home, because you know it's a sad place. And it sometimes if you can let it, like that transition is also painful for your parents to go there, or your grandparents to go there. That's probably one of those things nobody tells or prepares you or your parents for, that transition. So yeah, it's a hard thing. It's heartbreaking, because you know what's to come. You know they're going to feel lonely in there, but they're going to get better care by professionals in some ways, if they're able to be there, unless you're able to handle what's going on physically with your parents. But remember too, like when you're 60, 65 and your parents can't walk anymore, you can't pick them up and carry them around. And there's a lot of hoisting, because they don't have any more muscle anymore to get themselves off the toilet, or they may not mentally understand that they have to get themselves off the toilet. They don't have any muscle anymore to stand in the shower. You may have to pick them up from their wheelchair and place them into the shower. So there's all of those things that you would never consider. Oh, I have to pick up my parent and put them in bed. You know, those are, if you're not a strong person that has a lot of muscle to be able to do that well, then that can be very difficult. Very difficult. So it could be a potential. Now, I know that this sounds really bad, but if God, takes your mom or your dad before they get to a nursing home, that's a blessing, because it is a really hard place to go. Yeah. Isn't this such a happy class? This is so hard. It's so hard to talk about. So yes, in the retirement years, marital satisfaction is at its highest, because you don't have the pressures of work anymore, and you also don't have the pressures of child rearing anymore. So it is higher at this point than maybe most of the other times. But we don't ever want to say, oh, well, maybe one of these days my marriage will get better. Like, you always want to work on your marriage now, not later. Because you never know what's going to happen later,
People are always like, oh, I'll do that when I'm retired.
Yeah, I'll spend more time with them when I'm retired. Like, no, I mean, you need to invest in your marriage now, no matter what statistics say. So depression and loneliness do occur when the spouse dies and passes away. There are more widows than widowers. Do we know why?
Women tend to marry men that are older than them.
Yeah. Women tend to marry men that are older than them. And women statistically live longer than men. Statistically. So there's just not a lot of men that are widowers. So that's why it's actually kind of a good thing that when, like, if your dad dies before your mom does, to get her in like a social group of widows. And we did this with my grandma. And she was with a social group of other widows, and they spoke the same language. They could understand her grief process really well. And it was a really good thing for a while to have that ability to go over and play card games, with each other and go to coffee and, do all those things that they want to do. Crochet. I won't be that crocheter though. Yes, and social contact is very important for the recovery and the grief process. Retirement. Median retirement age is 60 to 63. But again, if you're able to work longer than that, then that increases your Social Security at the end, which is very helpful. The decision to retire is really impacted by these three things: finances, physical health, and job satisfaction. And if you're able to afford it. There are people who will retire too early, realize what they did, and then come out of retirement to work again. So understand what you're doing before you make that decision. And 1/4 of people do have a hard time adjusting, because when you stop working completely, you don't have a purpose anymore. You had, and that sounds really bad, but there's an element in your brain that wants to work, that has that purpose, that values that importance. It's not a part of your identity, it's just your purpose, is a part of it. So if you don't volunteer or you don't do anything within the community and all you do is just stop working and you're just staying at home, then you're going to lose the dynamic of that. So you want to make sure that if you do stop working 100% and you don't transition to part-time and then part-time and then stop working, that you want to find something else that you can put into and contribute towards, which is helpful. Making sure that I'm okay. Yep, we talked about that. That's not part of the test. Okay, great. I'm just moving right along here. Last thing in your book is death, which is, another joyous subject to talk about. Historic causes of death. And this is really not just even the end of life, we've lived our lives, now we die. It's what are related to death, what causes death. So infancy, we know infectious diseases happen, childbirth, mothers die or the baby also dies, war, and infectious disease. These are all the things that contribute to death. Even within older people, a lot of them die from influenza, pneumonia, those types of things. And we'll notice here historically that cancer was really low, partly because we didn't know what it was, right? So there's this little low predominator here for cancer, but again, we didn't really know what it was. And then it spikes. The more that we know about it, spikes some more. The more that we know of it, spikes up to this point. But you'll notice that infectious disease is already pretty high. And it will always be high. And even though we got antibiotics and we dropped it down more, we really spiked up in the 1920s because of a pandemic, the Spanish flu. And then 100 years later, we had another one. And then we dropped down because we were able to get more antibiotics and we didn't have a pandemic. And it stayed moderately to this point and started this process from 1950 to 2006 as far as infectious diseases. Heart disease, though, was low, partly because we didn't understand it, but also because we had much more nutritious foods that we ate. And then it spiked up in the 1930s, all the way up to this point. And why? Because we have smoking more. We have more foods that we're eating that's really bad. All of those things that contribute to heart disease. It drops off, starts to drop off within the 1990s, late 1980s, because we have campaigns for smoking and that it's bad. And then we drop off. So that's kind of the historic element of what causes death. Obviously, we don't have accidents and injuries and war in this category. We're just talking about specifically health issues. Oh, I guess we do have injuries. But injuries have just kind of stayed below the 10% line. Most of our country's automobile accidents are the leading cause of death of young people. Please stay alive. You would do. I don't know why I just looked at you, but I did.
I'll cry.
Griffin, I bet you the girls get more accidents than the guys. I bet you the statistics say that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Arteries, so coronary heart disease, a lot of this is due to plaque buildup, and this happens because of cholesterol and us eating a lot of food that we shouldn't, mainly oily based foods and brownies.
In the statistics earlier, I saw like the heart disease, it spiked in like between 1950 and 1955, and McDonald's was like founded right at that time. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. That was a big thing. So, if you choose between cancer and heart disease, what's going to win out? Heart disease. Statistically, yeah. Yeah, it still wins out. So that's part of your test. So make sure you write that down. Heart disease is the main cause of death. Leading cause of death, not the main. Leading cause of death.
Well, a lot of times you can get the best of both worlds too.
Yes. So, if we want to prevent that in ourselves, eating healthy, not smoking, and having exercise is good. And of course, exercise is good in all areas of our life. Stroke is another thing that does lead in the death category as well. This is a blood clot that happens within the brain. Women, for some reason, are more at risk with this particular thing. Heart attacks happen in more men, statistically. So, stroke for women, heart attacks for men. And risk factors are smoking, obesity, and blood pressure, high blood pressure. Cancer. Obviously, we are still searching and finding out ways to help prevent cancer. We are able to cure quite a few different types of cancer that used to be fatal. So we're making leads on that, but we haven't found an ultimate cure for cancer. So we're working on it. But you know what? You're going to die at some point. Whether it's cancer or an automobile accident at 74 or whatever the case may be.
Jesus might come.
And God might come. Yeah, Jesus might come. And that would be awesome. Suicide happens really within a lot of, yes, it happens. Women are more likely to attempt it. Men actually follow through.
Jesus.
I don't know why.
And they say we have commitment issues.
Yes. Yeah, you guys, yeah. So it is the lowest within African American women, statistically. And again, you'll notice that it is more of a main cause of death in developed countries and not developing countries. I'm not really sure why, but
There's a lot of focus on individualism and therefore the self. And I think when people are focused more on their community, they don't have as much time to self-loathe or sink into that depression because they're outpouring themselves in other people's lives. I feel like that's just a theory that can be one of the reasons why people suffer more with suicide in our culture. We have more time to think about ourselves.
yeah, we do.
And to suffer mentally.
Yeah. And really, in developing countries, they're fighting to survive.
Right, and that's what elderly people like that lived, close to 100 years ago will say. Like people didn't commit suicide because we were just trying to survive.
Yeah, trying to live. Yeah. So interestingly enough, and this does contribute to Alzheimer's, is our cellular clock. And aging is really impacted by this part because cell replication is limited when we get older. And so we have what are called free radicals that are in our cells, and a lot of it is produced through oxygen. And it's a molecule that doesn't combine, it doesn't actually connect with the rest of the cells in our body. And so this can really have an impact as far as cancer goes. And antioxidants is proven to decrease the free radicals that are in our system. But it hasn't been proven overall that it would be like the thing that helped prevent Alzheimer's and cancer. But it is something that does help. So where do we find antioxidants in? We find it in our vegetables and our fruits. There's what's called a Hayflick limit, and it's where our telomeres actually start to shorten. And so this shortened telomere does impact our life expectancy. People who are living to 100, their telomeres are longer. So it does show case that when we get to a certain age, these decrease in their size, which also causes cancer. Growth hormone, this can increase muscle mass and bone density. We want bone density to prevent osteoporosis. And surprisingly, what's called a DHEA helps with muscle growth. You can take it as a supplement if you want to. There's not like a 100% guarantee that this is going to impact your longevity of life, but it does help. And so you can't really take a growth hormone with injections unless you've had a diagnosis of some sort where the doctor wants you to take a growth hormone. But DHEA you can find at any store, vitamin store. Where we die. Have any of you guys thought about where you're going to die? No, we don't, right? Especially your age. We don't think about where we're going to die or where we're going to be buried either. I don't know why my grandparents had a plan of where they were going to be buried. I don't necessarily think that it really matters. But if you did think about, like, if you died here in Kansas City, being buried in the Kansas City cemetery, I don't know why I was going to say library, but the cemetery.
The dust on the books are
that dust on the books. But it does seem impersonal. And I know that a lot of us have a connection to our home. So maybe, where we grew up. So maybe that's why my grandparents wanted to do that. But in developing countries, most people die at home. And of course they age faster in developing countries, and they have a shorter lifespan in developing countries. They don't get to the point where they're completely debilitated living in a bed at that point in time, most of the time for developing countries. A lot of people die from heart attacks or other types of things, so they don't even get to the Alzheimer's portion unless you're in those countries that do have a longevity of life. But in developed countries, only 20% of people die at home. Most will die in nursing homes, unfortunately. There is a percent that will also die in a hospice care. Hospice is better than a nursing home, really. And a lot of people will actually be transferred from a nursing home to hospice care in some ways. But hospitals are another place where people will die, which makes sense because, if you get in an automobile accident or some sort of other injury that's fatal, that can happen, or if you died of cancer, you're probably going to die in a hospital, not in a nursing home from cancer. But hospice care, do you guys know very much about hospice care? It's really a place and a center for where people are giving much more of a hospitable approach to death. So people who are caring for your mom or your dad, really do care about their end of life. Are they as comfortable as possible with pain meds, with just overall care of their body, and making them as comfortable so that when they take their last breath, it's not painful. So a lot of times if people reach that point, like their kidneys fail or they have dementia and their brain stops working and all of their organs start to die, that's painful. It's painful when your organs die. And if it doesn't happen before your heart stops, then you're gonna feel that pain. So hospice will give a lot of medicine towards that end. And really it addresses people who are supposed to only have about 6 months or less to live. So when somebody becomes septic, that means what? Does anybody know what sepsis is?
Isn't that like an infection you can't cure?
Yeah, it's usually an infection in the blood. So somebody becomes septic, that infection has spread into their blood, which means what? It spreads throughout your entire body. That's painful. And so a lot of people who are older, especially women, will actually die from a root cause of a urinary infection, a UTI. And that'll turn septic. And then their kidneys will shut down and so forth. They also, at hospice, they'll give counseling to the family members that are grieving, who are watching their loved one die. And so there's a lot more care there. There'll be a doctor on hand to say, okay, well now they've reached this stage. Now they've gone to this stage. And then there will be nurses that will take care of the rest of the body. So bereavement care, about 40% of the deaths in the United States will be or have hospice care associated with them. Their job is not to get the patient well. Their job is to make sure that they are comfortable to die. So this was actually a lesson that we had to learn as a family, because we employed hospice care with my grandmother probably too early. And we thought that they'd help her get better. And they're like, no, that's not our job. Our job is to make sure that she dies well. So then, employing another doctor to see if we can help her to not be in so much pain and get better, and then the whole process. Euthanasia. There's what's called passive euthanasia and active euthanasia. What's the difference?
I would imagine active is just like, using some sort of medication to kill somebody, while passive would be slowly, but isn't passive like stop giving help essentially to whatever the problem is that's killing them?
Yeah, and it kind of like what hospice does, because hospice is very similar to what would be considered a passive euthanasia. Their job isn't to get somebody better. Their job is to care for that person until they pass away, right? So, when you've had a heart attack or something, and you might have in your will like a do not resuscitate clause, or a do resuscitate clause, because people will have that in their wills, or their last recommendations for their life. So you have those clauses in there. If you chose not to resuscitate somebody who had a heart attack or a stroke or whatever the case may be, that would be an act of what's called passive euthanasia, in that you could have had a chance to resuscitate them and you chose not to. Again, these are just passive elements. I think a lot of forms of death are passive euthanasia. You've done so much for your parents, and they may themselves decide that they are going to stop cancer treatments. They're just going to die, or whatever problem is occurring within themselves. So there's a high percentage of people, it's over 50%, that when somebody does get resuscitated back again, that they have a lot more health complications, a lot more health as far as lung goes, because it does deal with respiratory system, their heart, So they're not what they used to be when they're of a certain age. So usually about 70s and older, if you resuscitated them back, their quality of life is not going to be the same. And they may just be completely miserable. So you have a risk there that you would take. Now, and I would even have this conversation with your parents at some point here soon. It's important for them to have a clause. Do you resuscitate or do you not resuscitate? And the reason for this is because siblings that have to make this decision, right? So if one of your parents dies, you are left with the decision with your siblings. I'm going to tell you right here, right now, your siblings are not going to 100% agree in this area. So it is really good for your parents, both your parents, to have, do you resuscitate or do you not resuscitate in their last will that they have. Do your parents have a will right now? It's good if they do, especially if they're in their 60s or almost going into their 60s. Other types of care would be hospice or cremation or not to cremate. Do your parents know what they want to do in that area? Have they already made those arrangements? So some parents have gone through a horrible situation with their parents that didn't have anything as far as a will was going or what they wanted. So then they have decided themselves, I'm going to have everything lined out for my kids. And this is what's going to happen. If your parents do that, that's great. If they don't, now's the time to start getting them to start thinking that way of what they're going to do. Because they need to have that in place, especially if they're going to request things. You can't request those things like 10 minutes before you die. You know, like you have to request those things prior to that point and make those arrangements too. Do your parents want to be buried at a certain gravesite? Do they even care? Those types of things. Do your parents have land? Do your parents have a house? What does that look like? You know, who gets what if there are things that need to be given out to the siblings? Or is the home going to be 100% in all of your siblings' care? Who's going to be power of attorney? Do you guys know what that means? Yeah, the person who makes the decisions. The person who's able to write the checks for your parents when they can't think anymore about writing a check. Or giving the money to the nursing home or assisted living home or hospice. The power of attorney sibling that's selected is also the one that signs the death certificate. So it's good to have one. It's good to have either you or your sibling be the power of attorney right now, in case something tragic should happen. These are going to be some great things for you guys to discuss at Christmas, right? So back to euthanasia. This does happen in some countries, that they will actively do euthanasia. And actually, even in Oregon, here in the United States, it's legal to euthanize. I think there's one other state, I don't know if it's California, but it's another, what I would call a liberal state, allows people to be euthanized. But this is where it gets real difficult, because how do you determine when somebody is supposed to die? And are you playing God in that area and not allowing God to take them at their time? But other people would argue, well, if somebody is miserable, if somebody is wanting to die, but they can't die, if they want to die, why aren't we allowing them to die? Which, I mean, depression is part of that dynamic too. Great things to talk about. Yeah, so these are advanced directives. You guys will have a essay in your test about two siblings, about the do not resuscitate clause, and how would you make this decision, and what would that look like? You can have these advanced directives already legally addressed in a will, and that's something that's really important to do if you're able to. Okay, let's take a 15-minute break, or not 15, let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll get back and we'll finish probably within 15-20 minutes.
I mean, it's already selfish. Like, if you're gonna kill yourself, don't make it like super selfish, you know?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
At least clean up after your mess. Maybe.
Exactly.
Okay, emotional responses to death. So we all know that, as far as death is concerned, we're going to have an emotional response. We're not going to have nothing. There's going to be something along with it, and usually it's the 5 stages of grief, which we'll talk about. But grief always improves over time, and it's little bits at a time. It's not a huge amount. Even if there's somebody that you hated that passed away, you're still going to have an element of grief. It may not be sorrow. It may even be prolonged bitterness, but whatever the case is that there is a response to it. But we also have to look and identify grief in response to when it's a parent versus a spouse versus a child, because all 3 of them are deaths that do occur. May not occur within your life except for your parents, but may occur in other people's lives as well. So grief responses will change over time, and then new activities can help reorganize life, especially if your parent is survived by the other parent. Having them go through their grieving period, but then enforce some other types of new things is good to do. So variations: who has died, how did the death occur. When it's a sudden death, like an accident, an automobile accident, or whatever that looked like fatally, it was sudden. Those things are going to be different because there's not any time that gave you to prepare for the death. If it was cancer, it's different. If it's hospice care, it's different. There is a point of preparation. But whatever the case may be, there could be a risk of depression. Whether it's a parent's death or a child's death, usually statistically, if a child dies, the chances of divorce are the highest when that circumstance occurs. A spouse's death will increase the risk of mortality in the surviving spouse, depending on the age in which one went before the other. My great-grandparents, my great-grandfather was in a hospice care home ready to die, and my great-grandmother had a stroke on the road and passed away then. So she, as a caregiver, died before my great-grandfather was supposed to die, and then he passed away a month after. A lot of times with older people, the surviving spouse will die of a broken heart, and that has occurred too, which is hard for the children, especially because they lose both of their parents within a matter of months. That's hard. So grieving, the anticipatory grief is good, although you do start grieving before the death has occurred. So in some ways it's good, in some ways that's harder, because not very many people will understand you when your parent or person hasn't died yet. They'll understand you better when the death has occurred. So that is a hard part, because it almost feels like a lonely road, because you don't have condolences then. You don't have a resolution. It's just preparing for the death. So we have the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Denial usually happens when there's a sudden fatality. Anger will be a part of that, bargaining, and then the longest one would be the depression stage. And then the acceptance means that there has been enough time that has passed, and time heals. Time heals a lot, but it's slow. It's a very slow progress. A lot of times people won't recover from grief within 6 months to a year. Sometimes it may even take 2 years. So imagine your spouse going through that grieving process. To love, it means that you endure, that you bear. And that's a hard point. That's a hard stage. to go through with your spouse when it's, you know, you may experience the same grief, but it may not be to the level as what your spouse is going through, or vice versa. You're going through that grieving process and your spouse is trying to help with that process, but may not understand that it may take a year and a half. There's also what's called a grief disorder, meaning that you can't get over the grief as quickly as maybe some people would expect you to. And if that occurs, then counseling is a good way to go, to help get some of that clarity and to enable your spouse to be more understanding through that process too. There are limitations to this theory of the 5 stages too, because not everybody goes through that chronologically. And there is other types of responses, such as fear, especially if your spouse is the one to die or a child is the one to die. Fear can be a part of this whole grieving process, because you don't know what's ahead. You don't know what's ahead of yourself. And so that's that part of that process. So as we're talking about not only the grieving process, but how do people grieve? What does that look like in and around other countries? So this is the last part. This is an essay part of your test, is to talk about 2 different types of ways to not only grieve, but to honor the dead. And what does this look like about death? And so there's a variety of things, and we know that predominantly this comes with the religious part and aspect of what everybody identifies with. So anxiety is going to be the highest in emerging adulthood, because now things are disrupted. What you thought was the plan for your life is different. So death anxiety is the lowest with a late adulthood, because they understand, I've lived my life. If I passed away now, it would be okay for me. You guys probably don't want to die right now. That's expected, because you would like to see what your life looks like. So beliefs about death, and again, this can be a lot of people even within the scope of Christianity. What do people believe is associated with whoever they passes away? There are a lot of different types of Protestant religions within Christianity that identify as Christianity, that also have different beliefs as far as what it looks like life after death. Mortality, of course, we understand that we are all mortal. We're not immortal. That there will be an end. And so there are different types of funeral and ritual observances that happen. And the afterlife beliefs around the world are going to be different in the religions that they identify with. Now, there's a survey that was completed on the belief in life after death. And so you'll notice that lots of cultures around the world would say definitely yes. A lot of them would say probably yes. And again, this depends on where they line up as far as their religion goes. There's another survey that was done on, do you believe in life after death? 80%, just above 80%, were evangelical churches. So even with evangelicals, there's still a percentage that don't believe in life after death. Mormons are the highest, which is crazy that they're higher than evangelical Christians. So then you've got most everybody else is under 80%. So Muslim, Catholic, Buddhist, Hindu. Jewish is the lowest at under 40%. So Hinduism, we know that they believe in reincarnation, and that the afterlife is that you would come back as something. You would come back either as an object, an animal, or another person. And so they have a lot of different types of things that they do, but cremation is predominant through this society. but only the men are able to be a part of that process. So you would have a cremation of the body, and it would actually be displayed. So it even though it's called a crematorium, you're not going to a building. You're going to not like a town square, but very similar to that, in a temple. And you lay the body down in a fire pit, and then you light it on fire. The only people that can view that are the men. The women can't. They're supposed to be waiting at home until the men are done. And then the men come back home and they shower to get all the impurities of themselves off. And that's how the burial process goes. The reason for that is because their next life, their afterlife, is going to be another thing. And they will be in a animal or a person. And so they no longer need their body. Buddhism, reincarnation is another part of the afterlife belief as well. But the monks are the ones that play a prominent role. So they're the ones that basically initiate through different types of rituals the person into the next afterlife phase. There's cremation that happens as well. And there's a feast that's held on the day of cremation. And there's a lot of prayers that are performed by the monks. So it's not just one monk that comes, but it's several monks that actually come and perform the afterlife rituals. Judaism is a community of people. The body isn't left alone. And the body has to be buried. It cannot be cremated. There's a meal that happens. Family members enter a 7-day mourning period that's followed by a 30-day mourning period that can also extend into a year-long mourning period for the family member. What the book says about Christianity is that there are two forms of Christianity, the Catholic and the Protestant. And the Catholicism has a lot more rituals that are associated with the funeral process, whereas Protestants just have a funeral service, a eulogy, potentially they have, a meal, and a choice between either being cremated or buried at a cemetery. Islam, there is the reciting of the Quran, and then the body is bathed, and a burial also takes place. Cremation is forbidden. They are also laid on the right side facing Mecca. That's a very important process. They have a 3-day mourning period, and then 4 months and 10 days. Muslims will also be facing Mecca when they give honor to, I forgot about this part, when they give honor to the person who's passed away. So honoring the dead, in Hindu, there's an anniversary death. So we have what's called a Memorial Day. It's not a religious element, but it's something that we say to honor the dead. In Hinduism, it's the anniversary of the death. In Buddhism, it's conducted several times a year, and there's what's called a ghost month for Buddhists. And then for Jewish, it's the anniversary of the death. There's a candle that's lit. There's prayers that were recited. We have a Memorial Day. We also used to have, All Hallows Eve. That was a part of the Puritan era. In Mexico, they have the Day of the Dead. And then Muslims have a time where they actually visit the graves and offer prayers. You'll notice it's in October, the Day of the Dead in Mexico. Since my parents were missionaries in Mexico, when we were there at this point in time, there would be a ton of flowers at the grave spots, and all the family members would be there throughout the day, just loaded with people visiting the people that had died from their family. And that was even with those who were self-proclaimed Christians, who believed in Jesus and in eternity would still follow this tradition of going and visiting the Day of the Dead and praying over their ancestors. So, all right, that is it. Grace, you don't have to stay for this part because this is just about going through the questions for updates. So, thank Grace for saving you all with all these updates.
Thank you.
Okay, one of the other things too to note as far as the end late adulthood is that 50% of late adults will have a decrease in their hearing loss. And that 40% of deaths occur in the nursing homes. As far as end of life stuff.
So if I don't go to a nursing home, I have 40% chance of not dying.
Yes. Okay, so of course we're going through quite a few chapters here in the last part. So there is a question that asks what percentage of children ages 6 to 10 in developing countries do not attend primary school? It used to be 18%, and that's probably what a lot of your older books say. But it has now since been upgraded to 11% do not attend primary school.
11, you said?
Uh-huh. So that's good. The percentage of children in the United States that live with two biological parents, so their parents haven't divorced, it's 63%.
That was in developed or developing, you said?
Parents in the United States. Yeah. The percentage of adolescents that are in the United States that identify as LGBTQ is only 2%. Even though our media would have us think that it's a whole lot more. Still not great, but it's
When was that
better.
statistic taken?
The 2%.
Yeah.
Actually, even in the second edition, it still says 2%. But even with the updated version, which is 2019, it's 2%. So those of you who just have the second or first edition, there's nothing as far as online learning goes. So these studies that have been done have been since 2019. A lot of these studies that had been done had been during that time, but there hadn't been any answers. So there are 3 questions in the test that talk about online learning. So 87% of American college students were satisfied with teaching at their college. 87.
They're satisfied with in person?
They were satisfied with in person at their college. but that satisfaction was high in students at the small colleges with smaller classes. Online learning requires a great deal of three things: personal motivation, self-discipline, and focus. Because of this, because of the fact that online learning takes so much, 90% of college students who sign up for online courses don't finish. 90%. Yeah.
I dropped out of online. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, it's just not for everybody. And then the last thing, as far as college education, students said that one of the most important things, other than their major, that they learned in their college for their college education was interpersonal skills. Working with others, managing conflict, those types of things. And we went through this in class, but just if you can't find it in your book, American couples who cohabitate have a higher divorce rate than those who don't before they get married. All right, that's it. Also, I don't know if any of you guys have checked out the test, but the test will have the chapter where the question is from, and then the heading in your book of where the question is from as well. And then you'll see the question underneath that heading. There are 100 questions. Most of them are multiple choice. I think there might be 4 essay questions in there, so not much. Other than that, hope you guys have a great Christmas. It's fun having you guys in class.
This is the first time you've taught this class? Is that
Yeah.
what you said?
Yeah.
You were the pioneers.
Yes.
Guinea pigs.
Pioneering of this class.